In 2015, the world was introduced to Darkest Dungeon, a brutally hard, turn-based adventure game set in a dark and twisted fantasy universe. Now, 6 years later, the second game has entered into early access. Hey there friends, it's Codiak here, welcome to Legacy Gaming. Today, we're diving in and checking out Darkest Dungeon 2 to find out if it's worth your time. When it comes to punishingly hard games, look no further than the world of Darkest Dungeon. The team behind the games, Red Hook Studios, is once again plunging players into the chaos of a crumbling world for a brand new experience. And while there's a lot for fans of the first game to latch onto, there's plenty of new experiences waiting around every corner. As always, we like to start our worth your time reviews from a 30,000-foot perspective, and in this case, we have to keep in mind that Darkest Dungeon 2 is just entering into early access. That means in the months ahead, things are bound to change and develop as the team implements new features and balances existing issues. In Darkest Dungeon 2, you assemble a team of 4 heroes and set out on a journey to escape a world crumbling around you. Your goal is simple: reach the mountain. Along the way, you'll fight through a number of new worlds and come face to face with terrifying creatures and deformed monsters. Instead of crawling through dungeons, your intrepid heroes will set off in a wagon. Every action will be judged and narrated, just like in the previous games, as you navigate a sprawling world with choice at the center of every decision. You'll need to decide when to fight, when to flee, and when to help those in need. It's a balancing act, one that forces you to make tough choices, but just like in the first game, be prepared for when it all comes tumbling down. Before you set off on your journey to the mountain, you have to assemble a team. This is the very first decision you'll make in Darkest Dungeon 2, and easily the most important one. You'll start with a pool of just 4 heroes, familiar faces that will help ease you into the game. But as you play and progress, you'll unlock a deeper roster of heroes to use. Things are a bit different this time around, and your characters have 11 abilities in their arsenal, but not everything is within your reach right from the start. Throughout your journey, you'll learn the haunting truth of each of your heroes, reliving key moments from their past and unlocking new abilities in the meantime. This is all part of a new system called the Shrine of Reflection, and it's easily one of the highlights of the Darkest Dungeon 2 experience. The team has really gone to great lengths to give us more backstory on each of our flawed characters, utilizing the combat system to tell bits and pieces of each of their stories. Unlocking abilities isn't just for fun, it's essential to surviving the perilous journey, because once again, the Red Hook team isn't holding any punches when it comes to difficulty. Exploring each biome comes down to making a handful of decisions, choosing which paths to explore, all in an attempt to strike a balance between the game's various systems, all finely tuned and incredibly temperamental. Remember that torch from the first game? Well, it's back and just as important as ever, but instead of diving into your inventory to replenish the light, you need to help the desperate few you meet along the road. Choose not to help them and suffer the consequences. The less light, the more deadly your future encounters are, and if your torch extinguishes, be prepared to fight the cultists, an ever-present threat on the road. I've mentioned balance a few times, and I think it's really at the center of the Darkest Dungeon 2 experience. Each time you reach a fork in the road, you'll be presented with a choice, and there are a number of options to choose from. You can opt to fight, taking on a number of different resistance encounters. These range from standard 4-on-4 fights to more multi-layered combat situations. Introduced into the game are lairs, pinnacle challenges that throw multiple waves of enemies at the player. Stand and fight and be rewarded for your efforts, but as always, when there are greater rewards to be had, there are most certainly greater risks. You could also play it safe, choosing to go down the path that will reward you with an academic cache, a stash full of items, or even a field hospital where you can stop and tend to your wounds, clear up some nasty perks, and buy some combat items. Each landmark represents a new challenge and new opportunities, and you'll need to learn to master them all if you hope to survive the long journey to the mountain. Now that you know a bit more about some of the places you'll visit along the road, I think it's important to really dive into the gameplay loop, the things that really help define games in the modern era. The Darkest Dungeon 2 experience happens one run at a time. Those 4 heroes you select at the beginning of a round, those are the 4 heroes that will either take you all the way or meet a gruesome and horrible end. Vivid imagery aside, DD2 is a roguelite. That means starting at square one, progressing through a randomly generated world, and if you die, well, you start back at the beginning. The light part of the roguelite comes into play when you consider the game's progression system. As you play Darkest Dungeon 2, you'll earn experience that will feed into your profile rank. The higher your rank, the more items, characters, and quirks you'll unlock. Each level will introduce around a dozen new things into the game, and they're all aimed at helping make your journey on the road just a bit easier. Unlike the original game, where I felt like I was never really progressing, I can tell that with each run in Darkest Dungeon 2, I was getting just a bit stronger. It's a subtle change, but an impactful one, and with new biomes, enemies, and bosses planned for the future, it's important to remember that this is the system that will keep you from going insane, gently pushing you forward, even if you're failing. Darkest Dungeon 2 has made some incredible improvements to the way the game looks and plays, and it all really culminates in the combat. Characters are now in 3D, animations feature multiple parts, and the world in which everything takes place seems to have evolved immensely from the first game. If you're someone that played the original title and were skeptical about all of these changes, don't be, because while weird at first, you quickly realize how evolved the game looks and feels. It all really comes together when engaging in combat, and while the turn-based style from the first game has carried over, there are a number of improvements that, in my opinion, completely elevate the gameplay experience. The first is the introduction of a new token system. This is easily the biggest change when it comes to combat, and the one I think most people were skeptical of leading up to launch. Tokens are simply buffs and debuffs that represent everything outside of direct damage-dealing abilities. Gone are the days of guessing if you'll land a shot or not, and while chance is still a factor, it's clearly defined. Tokens have allowed the team the flexibility to create more moves, evident by the fact that each character has a deeper pool of abilities to pull from. At the time of making this video, there are 27 different tokens in the game. These range from things like Dodge, which gives the character holding it a 50% chance to avoid the next attack, and Immobilize, which restricts the character's ability to move positions. Other tokens like Benediction unlock certain special abilities for the character that holds the token. It's a system I can see endlessly expanding, but ultimately, it takes the guesswork out of combat, and that's a change I think many people will like. One of the other big changes in combat is the ability to see who attacks when. This makes speed a more tangible variable in combat and allows you to plan for different scenarios of offense and defense. Always present on the screen in the upper right-hand corner is a turn order, and this combined with the tokens makes the combat feel more like a chess match than anything else. Other things like the introduction of a new burn status add new layers to the already intricate combat, and of course there is still stress. Yes, stress is back and it's as brutal as ever. In Darkest Dungeon 2, each hero can accrue up to 10 stress before they have a meltdown, and you better believe it's just as bad as it sounds. When a hero has a meltdown, their health drops near zero, they often take on a negative quirk, and worst of all, their relationship with their fellow heroes takes a massive hit. Combat is as smooth as ever and easily one of the high points of the game. You might not think all of those little tweaks make a difference, but jumping into a fight feels good, and while the game is still frustrating, it's never because of the combat. I really enjoy the complete reinvention of the user interface as well. The more minimalistic vibe took a minute to get used to, but trying to go back to the way things were seems almost impossible at this point. By creating more room on the screen, the art team was able to make the world really envelop the players, and it's something I definitely appreciate as it helps keep me connected to the world. The combat is second to none, and while many imitators are out there, there are few turn-based action games that manage to reach the polish and satisfaction of Darkest Dungeon 2. The single biggest thing that will derail your run in DD2 is a bad relationship between your heroes. This is something the Red Hook team made central to the game, and a system I found to be the source of nearly all of my frustration. The road to the mountain is long, and being crammed in a small wagon takes its toll on your heroes. While exploring and during combat, you have to manage your heroes' relationships with each other. That sounds tedious, but in reality, there's very little you can do to keep everyone happy. While fighting, you'll notice that the actions of some heroes will have positive or negative effects on other characters in your party. You'll have to pay close attention to this, as repeating the same mistakes over and over again can prove to be one of the most costly mistakes you can make. When two characters reach a boiling point, the relationship is tested, and a new, negative aspect of their relationship will shape the interactions moving forward. This takes a number of forms, but for example, if a hero is envious of another, they may step in to block a heal or a buff that was intended for another hero, all because their relationship is in the dump. It's a punishing system, one that snowballs quickly, and when you factor in how stress influences relationships, you can imagine how quickly things unwind. On the flip side of things, if you manage to navigate the road well and build relationships between characters, you're rewarded for your efforts, and new bonds will form, sparking positive interactions moving forward. Good relationships are fantastic from a combat sense, as characters that are friends will often step in providing some basic healing, reducing stress, or even taking an extra swing at an enemy, all in the name of friendship. I really like the relationship system, but it's not perfect, not yet at least. Like I said, it's a slippery slope, one that's almost impossible to come back from, and when things go bad, they go really bad, and this almost always ruins a good run. A few meltdowns, a couple testy relationships, and your solid run quickly deteriorates, and honestly, it doesn't feel fair. I know Red Hook is known for their difficulty when creating games, but it's such a steep decline that it feels distinctly like a balancing issue. The real issue is that there's no easy way to repair any of your relationships, and once again, when things start snowballing, it's nearly impossible to slow them down. You do have some options, but to access those, you need to reach an inn. If you're skilled or lucky enough to reach the end of a biome, you'll get a few minutes of rest at an inn. If you're well acquainted with the hamlet system from the first game, this should feel familiar, as it's a place to build up your characters, improve their abilities, and prepare for the next leg of the journey. There are multiple things you can do at an inn, like use inn items to heal and buff your heroes, reduce their stress, and attempt to build back some relationships. You can also visit the Mastery Trainer. Here, you can spend mastery tokens you earn during combat to enhance individual moves of your heroes. Each move has a basic form and a leveled up variant that's stronger, and if you manage to empower multiple abilities, you almost always feel the effects of those in combat. The inn also features the Wainwright, who will upgrade your wagon with whatever improvements you've managed to scavenge while it's on the road. Finally, you can stop at the Provisioner, a vendor that will sell you all manner of items that will prove valuable during your journey. Items work a bit different in Darkest Dungeon 2, and I think it's worth explaining. Each hero can have 2 trinkets equipped at any one time. There's no armor and weapons to upgrade, but slotting trinkets can drastically improve your stats and ultimately your ability to survive. Trinkets don't carry over from run to run, which is why improving your profile level is so important, because it gives you access to more options during future runs. Additionally, each hero can equip a combat item. These come in all shapes and flavors. Some items will allow you to heal one of your heroes, while others are straight-up weapons that you can use as one-off attacks on enemies. The great thing about combat items is that they don't use up a hero's turn, so you're never really wasting an opportunity, just capitalizing on one even more. There are dozens of items already implemented into the game, and I'd imagine dozens more planned for the future. They're the unsung heroes of Darkest Dungeon 2, and the best players will learn how to make great use of their effects early on. Once you've done everything there is to do in an inn, it's time to venture out into the world once more. At each inn, you'll have to make a decision which biome to travel to next. Each region is home to a unique faction with their own strengths and weaknesses, and here again, you'll have to make a choice. When selecting a biome to explore, you'll also need to consider if your team is designed to tackle those specific challenges. For example, if your team relies heavily on blight damage, taking on the fodder and the plague bringers probably isn't the easier option. If you haven't already figured it out, Darkest Dungeon 2 is all about making choices. Too many wrong choices and your team is doomed to fail, but make enough right choices and you just might survive and make it to the mountain. Darkest Dungeon 2 is just entering early access, which means things are bound to change over the course of the next year as we head towards an official launch. What I know is this: the game feels incredibly familiar. The things that made the first game famous, like the turn-based combat and the interesting character and enemies, are back in full effect. The evolution of the graphics and world design also helped Darkest Dungeon 2 step out from behind the shadow of the first game and stand on its own 2 feet as a true successor to the original title. The game is frustrating, yes, and while some things like the relationship system still need a lot of work, it's a small thing when you consider just how much of Darkest Dungeon 2 already feels so good. Red Hook has once again put their best foot forward with a new title that's deviously delightful, brimming with potential, and if you haven't figured it out at this point, yes, Darkest Dungeon 2 is absolutely worth your time. The game is currently only available on the Epic Games Store, and I know this is going to be a big issue for a lot of you. The good news is this: Darkest Dungeon 2 will be launching on Steam and probably on other platforms as well further down the line. In our interview with Chris Barassa, he said that once the game leaves early access, it'll exit the exclusivity period with Epic, which will open it up to other platforms. There's no news yet if character profiles will carry over from Epic to Steam, but that's definitely something to keep an eye on. I'm having an absolute blast playing through the game and plan on making a whole slew of videos about Darkest Dungeon 2, so if you like our content and you want more Darkest Dungeons in your feed, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up, and subscribe. It's the single best way to help channels like ours, and we'd really appreciate the support. You can also join us on Discord. We've got a great community of around 7,000 members with a special section dedicated just for Darkest Dungeon 2, so check out the link below and join today. Finally, if you like everything we're doing here at Legacy Gaming and you want to help us out even more, you can now do so by becoming a member. For just a couple bucks, you're helping evolve the channel and take our community to that next level. Check out the join button below to learn more. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.